Ladies and gentlemen, 40 Waters, how are y'all doing? Welcome to episode 34, season 1 of the 40 Watt podcast. My name is Phillip, as usual. Haven't changed it since the last episode. Hope you're having a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is. For you, we're about to get started here with this week's episode. I'm super excited about it. But first of all, regular old housekeeping. Y'all remember, you can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are watching on YouTube, you can also get the audio version only. Listeners, if you would prefer to watch these interviews, they happen on YouTube, so you can go over there. Please be sure to like, subscribe, thumbs up, rate, review, follow, whatever you do on whatever social media, whatever you're doing. But here's something I don't normally talk about, so I'm going to mention it. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a couple of ways you can support the show. So we're gonna be real fair for a second. This podcast, not for me, it's not free. It costs me money. I have to pay for a bunch of stuff. I do it because I love doing it. But I would hope that I'm putting something out there that is making your life maybe a little happier for about an hour a week, maybe. It was 2 hours a couple of weeks ago. That was insane. But if you like the show, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/40watt podcast, where for as little as $3 a month, you can help make this show happen. For $5 a month, you can help make this show happen, and you get extra content every week. And then you can go upwards from there to $10, $25, even $50, in which we will do lessons every month. You and I will get on Zoom, we'll get on StreamYard, we will talk. I'll give guitar, bass, piano, if you're not already a great piano player, because there's a level there. We'll talk music theory, whatever you want to talk about. But if money's tight and you can't do it, don't do it. It's absolutely just the way it is. You can still help make this show possible by leaving a review, leaving a rating, by sharing it with a friend. So if you can do those things for me, that'd be fantastic. I greatly appreciate it. You can find us at Patreon, like I said, all the social media. Our website's 40wattpodcast.com. You can also email me at 40wattpodcast@gmail.com. Hope you will. If you got ideas, guest ideas, if you've got conversation ideas, shoot them my way, or just questions in general. So that's my self-selling. I'm done. Under 4 minutes. I'm doing all right. I'm going to quit telling y'all how fast I do it. Y'all can look down at your player and see how fast I did it. So this week on the podcast, I've got Lance from Dogman Devices. Lance, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So we met at Summer NAMM, and I finally got to actually touch your pedals and see the stuff you're making, and it was pretty cool. We actually got to hang out a little bit also at Eastside Music there on that Saturday when I impulse bought a Les Paul. I've talked about it a few times at this point on the podcast. I'm still really happy with that guitar. I finally got it set up. As of we're recording, listeners, it's been a couple of weeks by the time you're hearing this, but I finally got it dialed in and set up. And it was already a great player, but man, it's a great guitar. So people can hate on Gibson if they want, but you know they make a good guitar most of the time, some of the time. But yeah, so I got to check out your pedals. So my guess is I'm going to have a lot of listeners who aren't familiar with your work. So let's start at the beginning. We're going to go like way back. How'd you get into guitars? How'd you get into pedal making? What got you started?
All right. So I guess I'm going to take it all the way back. I first got into just music in general, just like when I was really little kid. Like I had piano lessons and stuff when I was a kid. I don't actually remember a time before I was in piano lessons. I never got good at it or anything. I used to play different instruments. Like in elementary school, I played trombone for a little bit, and I switched to the flute. And then when I was in middle school, I didn't want to actually join like the marching band. I didn't want to march and like have to do all this stuff all summer and all that.
Cannot blame you.
Yeah, and so I stopped doing that. I didn't want to stop playing music though, and my brother got an acoustic guitar, and I was at the same store looking at stuff, and I thought, everybody plays guitar. I'm gonna get this acoustic electric mandolin. And I never got very good at that either. But then a couple of years later, when I was in high school, I started getting into post rock, like bands like Explosions in the Sky and Godspeed You Black Emperor. And there's this one band in particular, Page Lost or PG Lost. They're this Swedish band, and they had this song called "Yes I Am" that like I had been into Pink Floyd and stuff like that. I had listened to music that had lots of effects in it before, but listening to those post-rock bands was the first time that it was like a central part of how they were sounding the way they were, in a way that was like kind of obvious, I guess. Like sometimes there's songs with like delay that it's kind of subtle, and if you aren't looking for it, you might not hear it. And with those post-rock things, it's like can't really understand what is happening if you don't wrap your mind around the concept of delay. And it was the first thing that kind of made me do that. And at the time, I was in this forum on MySpace called the Scroms Forum, where it was just like this punk music thing. And I talked to some people on there because I had heard of post-rock through people on that forum. And I was asking them, like, how do they do that? Like, how does it sound like that? And people were like, dude, it's pedals. What are you talking about? And then I got an electric guitar after that. That like when I got my electric guitar, I got a multi effects pedal and a loop pedal and the amp all at the same time. Like that was why I got into playing the electric guitar, was to be able to mess around with delay pedals. And yeah, and then I didn't actually get into like dirt pedals for a really long time. That most of my friends and stuff that I'd play music with, they didn't really play guitar, and so I wasn't seeing other people have a bunch of pedals or anything like that. And I was content enough with what I could do that I didn't really try to look into like what other bands were doing or anything like that. Pretty much until I like finished college, that I went to Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana. It's like this little liberal arts school. And I studied Japanese there, and right after school, I went to Japan to go teach English. And I figured I wouldn't bring all of my guitar stuff with me, that I would just get stuff there that, can definitely find guitars and stuff in Japan.
Definitely.
And
at least I've heard.
Yeah. And it was at that point that I wanted to kind of break away from the multi-effects pedal that I had and get more individual ones, just because it was a Digitech RP 150, which I still kind of use sometimes. That some of the modulation effects on it are kind of cool, but I never really liked many of the dirt channels on it. But the main reason why I wanted to start getting separate pedals is so that I could use like more than one delay, or more than one reverb, or more than one modulation effect. So I got to Japan, I got like a kind of a cheap guitar and amp, and then the next thing that I needed was like a pedal. I got a Electro Harmonix memory toy. It's like their small version of the Memory Boy that's already like the small version of the Memory Man. It's like,
which is a less feature-rich version of the deluxe Memory Man. Like they're all like this tiers.
Yeah, it's about as stripped down as they get, that one, and that's like still one of my favorite pedals. Like until I made my own delay pedal, that was still like my go-to for some delay sounds, at least. And I got that is when I started to like open them up a little bit more. That I at that point I did actually get some of my pedals that were in America mailed to me in Japan, and I started trying to mess around with circuit bending. That I saw like a couple little videos and stuff, but in hindsight, the pedals that I was looking at was actually what the problem was. That like there are simpler pedals to try to circuit bend, and ones that you can actually like see the components on rather than just seeing like the back of the circuit board where it's just like, oh, there's a bunch of solder points. I guess I'll just connect stuff. It's a little easier if you can actually see what the things are and not just randomly connect things together. Because what I was doing with that was fun, but it was not getting me anything musical. but But yeah, I started getting more pedals while I was there, and then after a while, I was able to kind of like find their more underground music scene. That I lived like in the mountains, but I was in uh, northern Japan in Iwate Prefecture in Morioka, and there's like a surprisingly active like hardcore punk scene there, and there's also like noise and a lot of psychobilly.
Really?
To this day, I've only seen a psychobilly show in Japan.
Really?
They were really cool. Like it was blowing my mind when I was there. And
Okay,
I
that was
planned this with
unexpected.
this is one of the local Morioka bands, Rappa. It's like really intense hardcore punk band that they're really nice dudes. But I started going to those shows a lot, and I through through the people in Rappa, actually, I met people in this band, Mortal Family. They're this like kind of like a jam band, but they also are kind of like a punk band, but it's like really funky, and they improvise a lot of stuff, so they're really cool to see live. And I was talking to them one time and telling them that like I play guitar. If you guys live in town or something, maybe we can jam. And they invited me to just be a guest guitarist at the like next show that they had because their normal guitarist wasn't going to be able to come. And at that time, the lineup was the drummer who was also the vocalist, and then they had a bassist and a guitarist, and then they would have kind of cycling other musicians play like other random little instruments. And for that show, and it was going to be in Sendai, which still in northern Japan, but it's like a way bigger city for that region. Still like not anything compared to Tokyo, but it's a
There's not a lot of cities that are anything compared to Tokyo.
Yeah. I guess for reference, sometimes people will compare Morioka to being kind of like Dayton, Ohio, and I'd say Sendai was kind of like us going to Chicago. Like,
okay.
Chicago's cool. It's not huge or anything, but it's pretty big. And at that show, the drummer's wife was going to play her modular synthesizer. And I had never seen one of those before, and she like let me goof around with it a little bit. And her main thing is like noise. It's like her main project with other settings. She'll do more kind of like drone type things or whatever. But seeing her modular setup just reminded me of what I had been getting into doing with my pedals, that I'd play barefoot so that I could mess around with the knobs while I was playing a lot. Because I don't know, like if you mess with the time on a delay when you're playing it, it makes those weird noises. I was really into messing around with stuff like that, and so her modular setup seemed like a way to just factor the guitar completely out of it and just be twirling knobs and stuff, and that seemed really cool. Anyway, at some point she invited me to play at this big like Tohoku area, the northern area that I was in. It was called the Tohoku region. There's this noise event there called Noise Jamboree that's like an all-day thing where a bunch of noise musicians from that area come and do stuff. And music I make now is a lot noisier than it used to be, but it's been something I've been interested in for a long time. That I got started with stuff like Melt Banana that's still kind of accessible. Like they're still playing regular instruments and stuff, but seeing some of this story aside, Noise Jamboree was insane. Like I have never seen anything like that before. There was a guy who, one of his performance things is he had a contact mic that was just on a spatula, and he just like cooked food. and then served the food. It was wild. But at that show, a lot of people there, which actually I can go grab one second.
All right.
A lot of people there had these kinds of things. It's like Springboks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that this is one that I made, but I remember seeing somebody there with one of these, and it was connected to just like a bunch of guitar pedals on a table, and that was like what they were doing, and I was so confused by like what is this? How are you making music out of this?
So
where did it come from?
For
And he
listeners,
told me that he just made it.
I'm just going to describe this for the listeners real quick. So, So what Lance is holding up is essentially a pedal enclosure that has two different lengths of spring mounted to the top of it, and I'm assuming they're attached to some kind of piezo, or I don't know what.
Yeah.
It's
just basically a contact mic is inside of it, and
so you effectively use it by hitting the springs or by plucking them, or almost like when we as kids we used to play with the door stops. You know what I'm talking about.
yeah, it's that same type of thing. And it's like by itself is one thing, but when you start connecting it to different pedals, it's a lot different than how it is with a guitar.
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar, but it's like it's a really percussive noise, and so when you add like a bunch of fuzz to that, it's like it's weird.
I think I saw you demonstrating that at Eastside Music. You were demonstrating it to someone, and I was like, what is going on over here?
No, I brought this with me to NAMM actually just to kind of to talk about. Like, I don't actually have any of these for sale right now, but they're if someone wants one, send me an email and I can make something, but they don't really turn out the same all the time. That like, if I were to sell these, I'd want the process to be locked down a little bit more. I've only made a couple of them.
And you want it to be consistent and,
Yeah, they're cool little things, but they're also, like I was saying with that guy, when I was asking him like what his was and where it came from and everything, he just said that he made it and that he had also made some of the pedals that were on the board that he had. And I was like, oh, so you're like an electronics engineer or something? And he laughed at me. He's like, no, you can learn how to do this on the internet, dude. I made this in my apartment. You speak English, so it would actually be easier for you to learn how to do it. And yeah, it really changed everything after that, because after talking with that guy is when I started to look more into what was happening in these other companies, because like the main companies I knew of that I knew anything about were like Boss, which is a very different company than what I have. I'm one person, and I don't know, when I started looking into stuff, I found out about how like Earthquaker Devices got started and like Death by Audio, and basically just discovered this whole world of smaller companies making stuff. And it was a while until I was able to actually get any tools or anything. That it's a whole other story, but I had been teaching English in Japan for like 3 years. And I wanted to get into something else. And there was like a week period that I was a traveling salesman for a Russian woman's German craft beer importation company that just happened to be located in Japan. And why I took that job is because that description is just too absurd to pass up. Like, that's
a lot of cross culture happening right there.
Yeah, I had to take that chance, but
it's an American selling a German woman's Russian beer in Japan. Did I get that right?
No, so I was an American.
Yeah.
The company, which this was also just a small company, it was basically just she was from Russia, but had been living in Japan. the beer was German.
That's okay. I got that reversed.
Yeah. Yeah. It was German craft
Wild.
beer sold by a Russian and American, I guess, exclusively in Japan. and but yeah, despite that setup, it wasn't actually as much fun as it sounded, and yeah, I ended up. Long story short, I basically needed to find a new place in an apartment really soon, or just move back to America. That like I had some places I could kind of stay in Japan, but if I wasn't going to be able to get another job, and I didn't really want to just get another teaching job, and it's like, why did I quit the one that I was just at? So I didn't want to do that, and so it was like I needed to find 2 weeks to get a job, and if not, I was going to be on a trajectory to just run out of money in Japan. And if I was going to run out of money, I figured I should probably be in America at least, where I know a lot more people. And yeah, I moved back, and then it was a couple months after I moved back that I was able to get my first like soldering iron and some pedal kits. And still, just at first, I was wanting to just make some stuff. Like it's a fun hobby that because it doesn't really like save you money to build your own pedals or something. It's just something I thought would be fun to do because like I like building stuff, and
I
like making music, and building a pedal still seems so much more accessible than building a guitar. Like, I've seen videos of people making guitars and have them like explaining how they're doing it, and it's still just like, how do you do that? Like,
to me, it's
that's skilled of a craft, I think.
Yeah, working on my own guitars. I've been, since I've been playing guitar, I learned how to work on my own guitars, and I still stop at like the moment you have to do something to frets. I'm like, I don't want to mess with any of that. I'm gonna pay a professional to do that. It's that's way outside, and as someone who like, I've tinkered with pedals, I've fixed pedals, I've never built a pedal. Modded a couple, from basically step-by-step instructions, right? I've never like gone in and like done my own thing. That's really intriguing to me. And there's guitar building is I think it's just a different skill set. To me, it's like, because like what you're doing with your pedals, first of all, when I saw your booth at NAMM, I didn't realize at that point you were making a delay. I'll be really honest. Like, I was still learning what you had in your lineup, because you see a lot of small up and coming pedal companies. A lot of them are coming out with like, they have a drive pedal or maybe a drive pedal and a something else. But like you've got a pretty impressive array already ready to go. So you can tell that you've really been getting into it. And I think that there's a whole skill in that don't downplay compared to building guitars. That's where I'm trying to get to. I'm stumbling to get there, but I think there's a whole other skill set that you're showing off that like someone who builds guitars for a living might look at and go, no, I don't want to mess with any of that. That looks insane.
No, I guess that's fair, but I guess actually what I'm thinking when I think of making pedals as being more accessible than making guitars is that I think that the tools are like, using a wood lathe is not something I want to teach myself to do, but teaching myself to use a soldering iron, that's like, you don't touch the hot part, like that's the main safety thing.
Oh, so that picture of the young woman using a soldering iron, holding it by the metal end, that's not how you use them? I thought I was just doing something wrong. But okay, I definitely can see that. It's like the tools you need to properly build a guitar. I'm not talking parts casters. I'm talking like building it from scratch from bare wood. Yeah, that's a totally different set of tools.
Yeah.
And I think every guitarist should know how to create a good solder joint. Like everyone should be able to do that.
Oh, and it's like, it's not as hard as people might think that it is.
Yeah.
My initial experience with soldering was with a different kind of soldering that in college I took some like metal art classes, and I think it's called sweat soldering when you have like two pieces of metal and you put a little piece of solder on it and you heat the whole thing with a torch. But that's how I had started soldering, which is different than what you do with the soldering iron, but it's kind of the same principle that you want to get both parts of it hot, to, like equally hot.
Yeah.
If you only have one area of like two pieces of metal that you're heating up, the solder will only flow to the hot side. So it's like when you're soldering a joint, well, you gotta have both parts of the joint hot so that the solder is attracted to both areas of it.
Right.
But that was like the only maybe leg up I had on learning to solder myself, that I had an instructor teach me how to solder stuff with a torch. So doing it with an iron just seems like, oh, I can stick this on here.
Yeah. I think with soldering, part of the hard part is that a lot of us, and I'm not going to show you my soldering iron because it is a piece of complete and utter crap, but a lot of us have like the Radio Shack soldering iron that we went and bought when Radio Shack still existed as a storefront, or we went and bought at like Lowe's or Home Depot, and and that, don't get me wrong, I've repaired a lot of cables with that very cheap soldering iron, and that's fine. But I'm not about to use that soldering iron inside a pedal where I'm going to do nothing but fry the internals, trying to get things that small. And so I think that's another hard part for some people getting into it. They get cheap tools.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is one thing that, like, I started off with a pretty cheap iron, because I started off and I was just getting into it as a hobby, and I used that same iron when I first started the company. After I got a little bit more money coming in, I did upgrade that, because the main problem with the iron that I had before is it was good if you were going to use it for a short period of time, but there was no real temperature control on it. So if you had it on for a long time, it would just start to get really hot, like more than it's really supposed to.
Right.
And so yeah, those kinds are good for when you're doing, when you're not going to be using it like all day. But if you have one little project, those will get you through it for the most part. But yeah, I'd say I think that like repairing and modding pedals is more difficult than like building a fresh one. I have some circuit boards here that I was soldering the other day.
Oh yeah.
And actually, yeah, like sometimes, I'm not going to put this on camera. I have one that I messed up the other day, and it's like, I had put the wrong value resistor in, and I didn't notice it until I had already put some of the bigger stuff around the side. Like, this is what a good one looks like.
Oh, gotcha.
And yeah, and so the resistors are the flat little things, and so when these other things on the side are already on, it can be kind of hard to get at those. And I'd mess around with that for a little bit, but after a while, it's just like I could just resolder another one of these boards faster than I can pull this one thing out. Like, sometimes they come out really easy, but other times it's just like,
it's a huge pain.
This is an unlucky one.
I've discovered that especially in repairing pedals, in which I could probably, I would need my toes, but I would not need someone else's hands and toes to count the number of pedals that I've repaired, right? It's under 20 Sorry, that was my really country way of saying it's under 20. But it's I it is. It's a pain to get those parts out. And like my biggest thing is like if you're not good with a solder braid or you're not good with a solder puller or solder sucker, like switches that have like 3 or 6 points on a board can be really actually I've got a buddy of mine's. It's a radial. It's one of the acoustic preamps, one of the radial acoustic preamps, and I haven't had a chance to really dive into it and open it up, but I think it needs one of the switches replaced, and I'm like, oh, I'm not looking forward to doing this.
I, knock on wood, I haven't actually had to repair any of my stuff, but I know, 'cause I test my stuff. I get kind of paranoid about things breaking, and then like I don't want to sell something to somebody and then it just doesn't work, and so like I'll test stuff, and when I have found something that like doesn't sound right, a lot of times I'll like kind of just give myself a time limit to, if I can't repair this in like an hour, I may as well just build a new one, because like there's a couple of parts on there that if I would like to get back off of it sometime, but
Right.
I can do that when I like don't have other stuff to do, which so far has actually just never happened. I just have like a box that has a handful of broken things in it that like, if I really can't find any germanium diodes, I don't know what else I'll do. I'll just take them off of those broken things, but hopefully I can just keep finding them.
Well, yeah, and it's like there's a reason a lot of companies, when you send in stuff for repair or warranty work, they just send you a new one. It's like because it is actually more trouble for them to repair. And this is big companies with a lot more resources than a one-man pedal company, And so,
well, it's like stuff like switches that, especially if they're like if they have the 3 things and they're mounted onto the board, like it's not just wires that are coming off of them. Those are insane trying to get those off.
It's terrible.
And if you're like a big company that is like paying a bunch of people, it probably is more cost effective to just replace it than to actually repair that pedal, because it'll take a similar amount of time to do that repair as it would to just make a new one. So
yeah, exactly. And it makes sense. But if you're making stuff, as like you said, you're pretty hardcore about when you're putting it together to begin with. You're making sure this stuff is ready to go. It's super solid using quality parts. Not everyone tests all their parts, and sometimes some people send out more lemons than the next person. I'm not actually thinking of anyone, so if you thought I was throwing shade at anybody, listeners, I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but we all know that there are those pedals out there that have a reputation for failing, and it comes down to parts and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, and sometimes like I've had the same thing happen with a few of my Fire Fuzz pedals, where I know with some people that, I don't know if you've talked to Zach from like Malaise Forever. He does a lot of stuff with germanium transistors, and a lot of times with those, the specs of the same part will vary kind of wildly. I haven't really built anything with germanium transistors, but I know that like he sent me a board for his Clubber Lang that's like his harmonic percolator type circuit, and that circuit has a silicon and germanium diode, or not diode, transistor.
Mm-hmm.
And in his little instruction thing that he sent me, he was saying to make sure that with the silicon transistor, that it's in that this one value is in this certain range. And the only way you can really do that is to just buy a bunch of them and test them. And like most of the transistors that I had didn't actually fit what he was looking for. I was able to find one, but with a lot of the fuzz that I design, I try to keep that tolerance in mind when I'm setting up how things are like biased and everything, so that with the Fire Fuzz, I normally don't need to check those values, but I have had a few pedals where I can't find anything actually wrong with them, but they don't sound the way they're supposed to. And the only thing that I can think of is that it is like those parts aren't quite the same.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's something that's a lot more of a thing in like a lot of older pedals that
Yeah.
we'll talk about, like vintage fuzz faces and stuff, that like not all of those were that good. And
No, they really weren't. And
the parts are just, they're not all the same.
yeah, because they were using whatever they could get. I mean, if those of, sorry, I'm stumbling all over words are hard. But if you've listened to any of the like Josh Scott talking about pedal making, or if you've even, I had an episode with Mike Pierre from Analog Man, and he talked about the difficulty of finding parts within a certain spec and a certain range. That's what they're doing now. They weren't, back when they were building these original, like the originals, the Univibes and the fuzz faces and stuff that's using, they're using basically cast off military parts and medical parts. Like nobody is out there building, like making germanium transistors for guitar pedal companies, because guitar pedal is such a small niche market. Those parts exist because the military and the medical industry were using them in things, or radios and TVs were using them. And then pedal makers used what was available, and sometimes what was available was crap.
Yeah. No, but one thing that's actually kind of cool about that is that's like, to an extent, is like what you're doing in like a dirt pedal is like, let me take this beautiful guitar signal and mess it up. Like, let me do exactly what you're not supposed to do when you design an amplifier and have this be really distorted. Like, I don't know.
I think that's the beauty of it, though, because like I think so much about what we think is great guitar sound came from things that weren't supposed to happen. Like we didn't want, look at, go back to Fender in the Tweed amps, for example. He wanted them to be clean. That's why he kept building bigger Tweed amps. Then he was like, oh, well, these overdrive too soon. So the brown face amps came about, and they overdrive too soon. Every evolution of Fender amps, from Tweed to brown face to black face, was him trying to make them cleaner and not overdrive. Meanwhile, guitarists everywhere were like, this thing overdrives so great, And it's like,
yeah, no.
or you look at like effects like flanger, which was discovered because someone put their finger on a tape reel while it was running, or, well, that may be apocryphal, but it's the essential. That's how that effect came about, because it's the flange of the tape. I mean, that's where it got its name. We see all these, you weren't supposed to do that, but it works. It sounds good.
That's like part of what's really fun about designing pedals, that like, but there was a little while that I was mostly just making little clones of stuff where I'd have like little variations. But it was just stuff I was making for me. But after a while, it just started to be like, I would really like to just design my own stuff. And while that is a bit different than just like following along with the kit, it's I don't know, I think it's just interesting. I think electricity is, the more that I learn about electricity and electronics, the more it does just seem like it is, like, how's this not magic? Like,
Yeah.
Like, just something as simple as a battery. Like, how's this just, knowing how this works doesn't really satisfy my curiosity about why it does what it does. And there's his name has slipped my mind. There's like this famous physicist, I want to say it's like Richard Feynman or something, has this thing that like if you do a YouTube search for it, you can find him talking about how no why question ever has a satisfactory answer.
Oh.
Because there's always a second, you can always follow it up with another why question. And like why fuzz sounds the way that it does is still something that just fascinates me, because it's like, yeah, it's just they're distorted. There's more harmonic content in it, but like, why does it sound like that? Like, why is harmonic content make this fuzzy sound?
Yeah,
Like it.
what's making it do that? And then why do
Yeah.
some of the same components in the same order sound different?
No, they're to an extent. It's like if we hook up these particular substances, they'll do this, and that's so weird. Like,
Yeah, you can't tell me that if you had a battery in the 1600s, they wouldn't call you a witch. It's 100% witchcraft at that point, you know?
yeah, it's I don't know. I think that stuff is interesting in itself to learn about, but then something that is just cool about trying to design how stuff sounds is that there's not really the same rules that there are in basically every other realm of electronics. Like when you're designing a computer, you want to make sure that all those things add up right. But with the guitar pedal, it kind of the main thing that's important is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I keep showing this little circuit board. This is a Chum circuit board.
Uh-huh.
This is that like really gated fuzz. And I am positive that the way that I have this transistor set up is incredibly inefficient. And that's why it sounds so gated and splatty that it's like it's not what you're supposed to do.
Right. Well, I think we're in a weird place in like the pedal industry, and I've talked about this with friends and other guitar players, and we're in such a weird place that like, and that's what I appreciate. Like, I'm a recent like devotee of fuzz. Like, that's been a recent development for me because I came from blues background, like old school country music. Like I was telling, I think I was talking to Dominique on the episode last week, that my first music was sitting at home listening to, like, I put together my mom's stereo that was in a closet, right? Like it wasn't even set up. And I figured out how to wire it up. You know, I'm like 9 and there's no YouTube. I just, it's got the terminals and I'm like, oh, I've got a black and a red wire and these are black and red connections on the back. That's got to go together, right? Like figuring it out. But I put it together and I listened to Willie Nelson and I listened to Waylon Jennings and I listened to an 8-track, where she had a Skinnerd 8-track. I don't even remember which album it was at this point. But and then I got into blues music and I got into that kind of stuff. So I was not a fuzz guy. Like I for those of you that are yelling right now, yes, I know fuzz has a place in blues, like a very specific style of blues has a ton of fuzz, but it wasn't until, because I bought a few different fuzzes. I went through everything from big muffs to fuzz faces and like trying to get into it. I was like, this sounds bad. I'm air quoting, y'all, bad.
Well, it took me a long time to find some fuzz pedals that I was like into. That I think that there's really kind of a lot of different fuzz pedals out there, especially now.
Oh,
That like I was talking about that Malaise for Lever, because Clubber Lang. It's like it's different than other harmonic percolator things. Like people describe it as being based on that circuit, but it's like, or just that harmonic percolator is also, it's a really like niche kind of fuzz, sort of like. Not every kind of fuzz is everyone's cup of tea. Really.
And when you mention the harmonic percolator to some people, they don't even know that exists. Like that's a very niche fuzz world.
Yeah.
I've got a buddy of mine, Eric Brania, who builds some pretty incredible. I've talked about him on the podcast. I won't go into a crazy thing how much I love his pedals too. But he's very, very small builder. Like, doesn't build production runs. He just builds. He finds cool cases and builds things into them. He's working. He just put together a 1-of-1 harmonic percolator. Like, and it's like that's a circuit that's starting to come back in vogue. People starting to talk about it again. But when you talk fuzz, It's the widest gamut. It's everything from like super smooth, like you can get the Eric Johnson sound with fuzz, and he did. That's how he got it. Or you can get like what you were talking about with the Chum, that super splatty, spitty, like it shouldn't sound good, but it does.
Yeah.
It has a thing. Or you get into my favorite effect, the octave fuzz, and to me, just the nastier and raunchier it gets, the better.
And one thing that I really like about the delay that I have is the way that I have fuzz in it.
I was
That
going to
it's
talk about that. It's not, you
yeah,
didn't just
not
build a
to just
delay.
do like a whole shameless plug here, but like the idea that I had when I was coming up with Air, that like I was saying before, delay is what got me into guitar pedals, and so I really wanted to like make a delay that I'd be like just really into. That
Yeah.
like, you know, like I can't think of a good way to explain it. That in a way that I know that Air is not really for everyone, but in a sense it's because like I made it so specifically for me that I had
Well, I
there's a
love.
similar thing that I used to do that I would need to use like 3 pedals to get that kind of sound. And part of it was that just when I was doing it was when I was in Japan and I had a few different pedals and I couldn't really afford to get more or get any other kind of gear, but still wanted to change the like sound that I was having and started to just put stuff in weird orders at that point. And having overdrive or fuzz come after delay, especially if I had like a kind of short delay time, it would be really cool. It would be almost is kind of like a different effect where it kind of reminds me of like a ring modulator, but it's
Yeah.
also it's a bit more approachable than a ring modulator is.
Yeah, because I can't play a ring mod. I've tried. I can't do it. It's
I don't think you can use that in a blues setting.
no, and even in like the noisier stuff I've tried to get into, I'm like, I don't know how to use this. I need I need a ring mod for dummies book is what I need. Like
I feel like if you're making music with a ring mod, you're not likely making music with other people. like, and like maybe a drummer or something, but like if you want to play in tune, you can't use
a ring mod. No.
And I would say that the Air, you can kind of get into tune, but because the fuzz is in the delay line, not to get like overly technical, but the signal will come out of the delay chip when the fuzz part is on. It will go through that, and then just how the normal repeats on a delay work is that is fed back into the delay chip.
Right.
And so what that does with the fuzz is that actually makes it kind of like there's a feedback loop affecting the fuzz. So that's like why it will get into self-oscillation so quickly, is that there's 2 different kinds of oscillation that it does in that fuzz mode. That some of it is just actually coming from the fuzz circuit that like, I don't know if you know, like a ZVEX pedal, like there's just self-oscillating fuzz is a whole other thing that you can get into. So it kind of is like that, but it also will get that it still is going into the delay, and you'll get the same kind of feedback that you get from delay, but that's like kind of why it doesn't run away from you the way that can, is because the main oscillation that you're getting is actually coming from the fuzz, and so when you play something on that will cut that out. And so
okay, I'm not gonna pretend to understand everything there, but I get the idea, because and maybe not all of my listeners understand. Like I only vaguely really understand where you're going, because there was an episode of That Pedal Show. I don't know if you watched That Pedal Show, but there was an episode where Dan built this massive pedal board to demonstrate how a multi-head delay works. And so instead of just having a delay pedal, he had a bunch of pedals that represented each individual part of the inside of a delay pedal. So like he had a whole section that was the feedback loop and how it would feed back in on itself and how it would feed the clean signal direct through. It was insane, but it made me understand the way delays work. So I understand how that it feeds back in and on itself. And I definitely know how fuzz can, especially ZVEX. You're right, because the Fuzz Factory changed the game for fuzzes in general. In fact, the Fuzz Factory was one of those first fuzzes that I tried, and I was like, apparently I hate fuzz. Because now, of course, I listen back and I'm like, oh, you just didn't know what you were doing. It was a total user error. It just didn't know. But yeah, it's a wild, and that's what I liked about your air pedal is that you didn't like that's so unique in the pedal world. There's no one else that I know of that's done something like that. And that's so cool. It's like when, a couple of people have done it. Chase Bliss did it where they did like trim and fuzz in the same pedal. There's a couple of companies that have started to do that, and it's like, what a weird, wacky, like wild way to do an effect, but it works for certain things.
Well, and so that's what actually kind of surprises me about Air is that I feel like the description of it makes it sound like how's this useful, but it's really like there's a clean, there's a wet, dry like mix on it. And that really makes it so you can actually have it be pretty subtle, or you can also just not have the fuzz part on, and it's just kind of like a analog delay thing, which I've been thinking about making more delays in general. I had toyed with the idea of making a standalone version of that, but then I was like, I should at least change some stuff about it.
Sure.
I've actually had enough people pretty much ask for that I'm considering just making. I still feel like I would end up changing a little bit of like
something
not
about
anything
it
too crazy, but like
something to just make it interesting and not just an analog delay.
What?
Something to make it unique, so it's not just an analog delay, or it's not just the delay out of this pedal. Okay, it's that circuit, but here's what is different about it.
Yeah, that I've had enough people ask about it that I feel like there's at least some audience for it, but it's I don't know, as weird as an effect as Air is, it's also like one of my most popular ones. That it's like I think Death by Audio has, I can't think of what it's called. I know that they have a fuzz pedal that has, I think it's delay and modulation. I know that the way that it works is sort of different than mine, but I'm pretty sure that they have delay and fuzz in the same pedal somewhere. That I don't think that it's only me that has it, but it's
Well, I'm not as obviously I know who Death by Audio is, but like I don't know their entire lineup, and that's the other thing is like there are so many pedals out there, so many pedal makers out there, but even then I can't think of another one, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I mean, I also, when I was coming up with it, another thing that I get sort of paranoid about is thinking that I came up with something and then finding out that someone else has the exact same thing already.
Oh, yeah.
And so I specifically was trying to find delay and fuzz pedals. And so I came across a couple, but I don't know if that's a rabbit hole many other people go down.
No.
They're like, I need fuzz and delay. I want it in the same pedal. Not like a multi-effects digital pedal. It just does fuzz and delay.
You're right. And because I did that thing you're not supposed to do on a podcast, and I Googled it just because I'm curious. And not that we're here to pitch Death by Audio, but they do. They have the Echo Dream. That's a fuzz and delay. It's also got some modulation, which I'm assuming is on the delay. But yeah, advanced echo modulation. they've got some wild fuzzes. I'm just gonna throw it out there. Go
Death by Audio is really cool.
Yeah, if you haven't checked out Death by Audio, folks, listeners, go to their page after you've checked out Dogman Devices and looked at look at the pedals that Lance is making. But also Death by Audio's got some pretty cool stuff that I've not gotten to play any Death by Audio pedals yet. So it's on my list, but there's only so much time, so many pedals, and finite resources.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I've had I've had my eye on a few of their pedals, and actually the same with Earthquaker Devices. Last fall, I was able to get the time shadows that they did together.
Oh yeah,
which is cool, but I feel like it doesn't quite scratch the itch that I still want to. That pedal itself is cool, but it makes me just want to check out more of their stuff, really, from both of those companies.
Yeah, I recently got I bought it used. I found a guy selling it locally, Dispatch Master, which is like delay and reverb Earthquaker Devices. Yeah. And I've had the plumes, which we won't talk about. It's a tube screamer, y'all. There's nothing, it's a good one. It's a really good tube screamer, but it's a tube screamer. I had it, I sold it because ultimately when I want a tube screamer, I just want a tube screamer. I don't need a fancy tube screamer. It's a TS9. Actually, I use a Sparkle drive, but that's neither here nor there. What I like to do, and you have probably done this, and this is I recently got a DoD rubberneck, and it's got the loop where you can put a different effect in the loop of the pedal so that it affects the repeats. And so I've had a lot of fun. Hold on, it's nearby. It's not too far. Let me make sure that my cable's not going to pull everything over. So it's a big pedal for a delay pedal. It's got a lot of features on it. I'm not going to pretend to try to get this, but I'm still learning how to use all of it. It's got a gain and tone. It's got a rate and depth for the modulation on it. But the coolest feature is that it's got a TRS loop on the back of it. So I have started just putting weird random effects in there, right now, or not right now because obviously I don't have it hooked up because I was cleaning my studio today because it's been a wreck since NAMM. It basically it got torn apart and tried to put it back together today. It's still not completely done, but I put an analog synth in the loop, and it's crazy sounding. It just does this nutty stuff. You're not going to use it in a blues set. 100% not going to use it in a blues set. But it does some weird things, and it's really, really fun. Or I've got a filter pedal that I'll put in the loop. But I have both the Bigtronic, because they were stupid, musician's friends, stupid deal of the days. The Bigtronics mothership and the Bigtronics, whatever they call the envelope filter. I can't think of it. But I put it in the loop, and it gets weird fast, real fast.
Sometimes that's exactly what you want, though.
Yeah, it's an interesting, different sound, but you can put a fuzz in the loop, or you can put put another delay in the loop of your delay, or a tremolo pedal, or I'll just put my HX Stomp in the loop of it and just start really getting nutty with it. But
no, that's an interesting idea that I've heard of some pedals like that.
Yeah, so maybe on your delay, your analog delay, when you do it separately, just put a loop, put an insert somewhere in the signal where you can add a different pedal to the loop.
That's a good idea.
There's not enough delay pedals with a loop like that. It's such a cool thing.
No, really, that would be. I'm pretty sure that off the top of my head, I know exactly how I would do that. That it's kind of the way that internally that air is set up. I would just have the input and output of where that fuzz part is would just be jacks instead of having an actual circuit right there.
And you can put it, it's essentially what you're doing, and it's
That's a
There,
good idea.
there you go. I feel that delay pedal's happening. Just put me on the list. I want one. Because it's super cool. So we haven't even talked about, like, we've already been talking almost an hour, and we haven't even talked about. So you've got right now, if your website's 100% accurate, you have 5 pedals in your lineup right now. 3 are fuzz, 1 is fuzz and delay, and then you have an overdrive. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's there Y and Ouroboros they're sort of pedals. They're in pedal enclosures, but they themselves aren't effects.
Right. They're utility.
Yeah, like Y is pretty strictly a utility. Ouroboros you can use as a feedback looper. It also has a true bypass loop and has like a momentary mute switch that you can use as like a stutter thing. But
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize it did that.
yeah, and as far as but like what it will do will depend on what you have connected it in that little loop. And actually, I was talking to somebody the other day about blend pedals, that like ones that would just are strictly a wet dry mix thing. That this guy plays acoustic guitar and wants to use like dirt pedals with it, but they're a little bit too much. And so with that blend pedal, you can kind of dial it back a little bit. But I was talking about him with that, and I'm not sure how I would fit it in, but to add that to that feedback looper would actually be a really easy mod because it would just be like adding a potentiometer that is connected to just the true bypass loop on there. Because the way that it is now is that loop can just be on or off, but if I made a little volume control on it, you can make it so that you were using it that if you just wanted there to be a clean blend on your fuzz pedal, you could do that. And
that would be really cool.
It's just so that it would be such an easy mod on that pedal makes me just want to do it. At least for, it just seems like if I'm going to do it for my personal one, I should probably release that as a thing. But.
Yeah, just make it available. That's pretty common. I mean, look at Old Blood Noise. They do a ton of things that were just like, oh, we wanted this to make our life easier, so here it is. Like they've got their ramper pedal that I still don't have and I want. It's not a pedal. It's an expression jack knob that's automated. Like it's...
I want like all of their stuff.
Yes.
They're cool. I've talked with them a little bit that I ended up not... that I think that they've actually switched to UV printing, but I know that before they used to like silk screen all their stuff, and that they, before they were doing pedals, had some kind of background in that. And for a while I was looking into silk screening stuff, and they gave me some really good advice on setting up a little spot for that. I ended up, that's a whole other story, but like I was trying to make my screens with drawing fluid and screen filler instead of having like a screen shop make them from like a digital art
Oh,
thing.
sure.
And that drawing fluid is just, when I was talking with the Old Blood Noise guys about that, they're saying that the only reason they think that they haven't seen people making pedals with screens that they made with the drawing fluid is just because it's really hard. And yeah, it's really hard. I threw the towel in on that one. I might get some screens made somewhere, but I don't know.
Sometimes you got to just know where the line is for how much work you're putting into something, especially as a one-man operation. You're like, this is going to take, and you start, especially, once you start figuring out if you decided to do that, what's that going to do to my price point because of the time it takes me to get this right and do these things. And
that's what's really kind of awkward about doing the engraving is that
we were about to talk about that.
Time and is like, it's just kind of hard, but at the same time, it's, for me, it's sort of like cost effective because it's for one thing, it's something I already kind of know how to do, I mean, especially now, but before I had been doing it a lot on pedals, I had just worked with bare metal and stuff in my college classes.
Oh,
And
sure.
so, and like on this little spring box thing that I have here, it's hard to see, but like those little mountains and stuff,
Oh, yeah.
that's done with, that's how I was first doing my engraving stuff on these, that's done with like a little hammer and chisel thing. Those lines are really thin, and then
Really?
I have a tiny chisel and hammer that I do it with. It's hard. What I use now, but I have a lot more experience using
Sure.
that I need to dig it out. I have this like mushroom vessel thing that I made that I when I talk about when I used to do metal stuff, I think it would maybe be helpful if I had like literally any example of what I was talking about. So I've been thinking that out so I can show people what I mean when I say that. But I already had some of those tools and I had experience working with them. Screen printing is not something I really have much experience with.
That
And
makes
so,
sense.
like, when I was talking with the old Blood Noise guys, some of the stuff that it, like, the stuff that they told me about was really helpful, but then it still puts me right at the spot where the fact that I am just not good at the actual screen printing part makes it like makes it so that even if I were really good at doing that, it would be really fast and pretty simple to do. But I'm like just learning how to do it, so it's really slow and like I waste a lot of material because it's like this wasn't a good print and I don't have enough like circuit boards and stuff for it to seem all that
Right.
worthwhile to be like, let me just release like 20 B-side things. Like I'd rather get them like cleaned and do it over again, but then that's the time on that just really starts to add up and to the point where it's like just doing the engraving will actually be more efficient than learning this other new skill.
That makes sense.
But yeah, it also it has it has its ups and its downs. That I like the way that it ends up looking. I like the actual process of doing it,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't like that I can do like one or two a day because it's like doing much more and it just is like a strain on my hand.
Oh, yeah.
And
So you said you used hammer and chisel before. You almost said, what did you switch to now? You used like a Dremel
so
tool?
now I actually use a rotary tool. So I
Yeah.
have a Dremel and if I don't I don't have any that are right around, but the older engraved ones that I have, I don't know any way that you would really be able to tell. I don't think in pictures it's all that apparent. They're
Yeah.
actually way deeper than the ones that I use now.
Okay.
I switched to a diamond tip, uh, like engraving bit instead of the like carbide one. The old one was like really, really digging into the metal, but
Oh,
it was
gotcha.
also you can still just kind of make lines with it. With the diamond thing, you can kind of shade things in,
Oh,
and
cool.
it doesn't go down as deep, but it doesn't it doesn't wobble or anything. It's just a better thing.
So
And
for the listeners that weren't able to see the pedal earlier and aren't familiar, go look them up. Seriously, pause the podcast. We're actually really close to the end of this episode. Pause it or finish, but go look. So on Lance's pedals, Dogman Devices, all of the like control indicators for the knobs, the designs on the pedal, they are engraved into the box. It's super cool. It's super unique. You're not going to see anything like it. And honestly, I mean, it is one of the things that like is like a hallmark of your pedals. It's really really cool. It's very much you. You can tell this is you've put you into these pedals. Especially again like with the air where that's it's like, oh, I'm making a pedal that I made for me. If somebody else wants to buy it, that's awesome. But this is what I wanted.
Well, when I was first starting the company, like with all of the elemental stuff, they're things that are kind of made for me. And when I was first starting the company, that's pretty much where I thought like my sphere would end at. That like a couple of random people in town would be like, oh yeah, I'll get some of this stuff. But I didn't really think I'd be making more than like 10 of different things. That like the initial like run that I did of the Overdrive Earth was 5 pedals, and that was initially going to be like, that's it, making these 5. I'm going to move on to the next design and probably make like 5 of those. And yeah, so
at this point,
it's interesting to me that other people like these.
yeah. At this point, how many of those overdrives do you think you've actually made?
With the overdrives, I have one of the ones that I finished the other day is over here, and I have like the serial numbers that are on them.
Oh, okay. Because I'm curious, and I'll talk while you're getting it. Is that you talk to pedal makers who are like, oh, I didn't expect to make very many, and then or you talk to small pedal makers. I think this surprises people. Like I talked to a quote unquote small maker that has a pedal, 2 pedals in his entire line, and I was like, so how many pedals do you sell maybe a month? And I was really expecting like single digits, and he was like, no, I sell about 25, 30 pedals a month. He said, in my busiest months, I can sell, 50 or 60 pedals a month. I'm like, that's way more than you think, especially in the pedal market when a lot of people think, because everybody thinks Boss with pedals, they think, oh, Boss sold a billion of the DS1. They are entirely the exception to the rule of like how many pedals. Like, selling 1,000 pedals for almost any other maker, period, that's like insane. That's why like the whole Chase Bliss thing with their limited run pedals blew my mind when they sold out like 1,000 in 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. No,
it's
wild.
It's a completely bonkers number to me, but like other pedal makers, like, if they're selling 100 pedals a year, they're doing pretty good. Of any particular market. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's more or less like the numbers that I aim for.
Yeah, exactly. So
the overdrive that I have, I think that's the most recent one that I made. That one's number 58.
Yeah, so you're well over 5. You're 11 times over what you thought you were going to build. And
the Fire Fuzz, when I first released that, the like powder coated ones that I'm not sure if I even have the pictures of those ones up anymore, but they were the first run of things that I did that I chose to stop working with a company that was doing that powder coating for like I just heard some unpleasant rumors about how they treated their employees and stuff, so I didn't really want to mess with that company anymore. And that's partly why I started engraving stuff, is that I wanted to just do everything that I could in-house so that I didn't feel like I needed to examine every like supplier that I'm working with to make sure that they aren't like just have part-time employees that work 39 hours a week and don't have any benefits or anything. Like,
yeah. You wanted to be
an actual part-time job, or just make it a full-time job, dude. Like,
yeah, you wanted to be conscious of the companies you work with, make sure they're. Yeah. It's one of those things we need to be more conscious of, and not to get like super down that socio-political route. But it's like, especially in today's world where, you got to be really aware of how you're treating people. what we're seeing recently, and I promise listeners, I'm not going to go far down this rabbit hole, I promise, but like with the Lay's potato chips that happened recently, have you seen that? The protests by Lay's company employees? They're talking about they're working like 18-hour days, 17 days a week. They're barely getting to go home and like get sleep. And like one of the stories that I heard, this is just complete horror to me. Someone literally died on the line for Lay's potato chips, and they just had another staff person move the body so somebody else could get into that spot and keep working, and then they dealt with it.
What?
Like, yeah. And so there's pickets and like strikes going on with like Lay's. I need to double check this before I completely badmouth Lay's. It is a potato chip company.
I've heard of this, but I guess I also, most of the news that I hear
I'm sorry, y'all. It's not Lay's. It's Frito-Lay. So that is Lay's. So yeah, Frito-Lay. Yeah, it's gotten wild. And apparently they just ended their 20-day strike because they finally got higher wages and a day off a week. A day off a week.
What?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. So you gotta be aware, like as an employer, and meanwhile Bezos is going to space for 5 minutes. And I'm gonna end world hunger, or I'm gonna go to space for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean,
literally similar costs. Anyway,
yeah.
I digress, listeners. I promise. So, Lance, we're gonna wrap up the regular episode right here. But, listeners, if for $5 a month, you can join our Patreon, and you will get bonus content like the episode that is going to follow this one, where Lance and I dive a little deeper into pedal making and some of his inspirations. And then I'm going to really ask him some questions about, because this is something I don't know a ton about. I actually am not super familiar with post-rock and noise rock and stuff like that. So I want to talk more about this. I want to understand. So in the meantime, listeners, go to our website, 40wattpodcast.com. Go to our social media. You can follow, friend, like, subscribe, thumbs up. I'm going to learn all of these one day, but you know how to use social media, I promise. Go there, do all the things, and I really appreciate you listening. And remember, as always, be kind to yourselves, be good to each other, and try to make some noise.